how do we build communities with healing at the center? How do you build a community that's authentically about the individual, and that the alchemy, the ecosystem of that community is essentially healing?
So much of the things that we practice, we assume there's some reason we do it, but there sometimes isn't. So just when someone pushes it, maybe they did push too far. Maybe they did, but now let's have a conversation about where that is, because it's not as if everything is working so swimmingly well.
Who I am is whoever I am in this moment. All that matters is where I am right now.
I've never met a religious person who's not afraid of spirituality.
Lamplighters was not just a school or an interesting educational model or whatever. It had a soul. It had its own entity. It had its own vision, its own rhythm of unfolding.
Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. There we go. Welcome, Yocheved.
Hi, Ellie.
I'm sitting here with Yocheved Sidof. We know each other, but from a different lifetime before this evolution of me. I don't know what's happened with you. You look the same. Plus a few things.
Plus a few earrings, at least, right?
Okay, so where do we start? We start at, I guess we'll start at the end. So, first of all, some of the audience, I guess, knows you because we did a couple of conversations, besides for people who just happen to know each other, but we've done a couple of conversations on this podcast, but none. You did one about the school, which we're both involved in, Lamplighters Yeshiva.
Yeah, we did one to sort of talk about the ending of the school.
Correct.
A post-mortem, I think we called it.
Yes, and then we did another one about a project we put a lot less into, but is actually living on now. Yocheved Grai Kindness Award.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. So they just had their third annual event, which was nice.
A lot of nachas, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So we did one of each of those, but not so much about you. So we'll get into your story a little bit. At the moment, you're building a community, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like part of the deprogramming of the last few years has been to remove the focus on the doing and to cultivate a lot more being. So it's interesting to kind of go directly into the doing. Like there's a part of me that's like, wait 1 second. But yeah, I am building a
okay, so let's not start there. We'll get there naturally. Where would you have started had I gone more of the being or doing? More of the being versus the doing?
Maybe I would have just asked, like, how are you?
I've been asked that in a while.
Yeah, with the caveat of, like, what does that even mean to be asked, how are you, and to really mean it? I'll start. How are you, Ellie?
Oh, I thought you were asking me that. You wanted to say that's what I would have asked. No, when we get a female host, they'll start interviews with how are you? So, how am I? Yeah, let me try that. Yeah, I think good. You know something? I guess I'm also, maybe I'm interested in your evolution because I'm interested in my own. So, meaning I feel like I've been on one also.
Yeah.
Right? The last few years, like when we left off, say Lamplighters was what? COVID is when it imploded?
Yeah.
2020?
Ended June 2020, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we can blame it on COVID. Everything was great up until COVID happened. And then an unfortunate casualty of COVID. Look how I didn't answer the question of how I am. Wow. So, how are you?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about evolution. And to answer that question, because I can't look at you and not see all the history between us, in a sense.
Oh, the Lamplighters and...
Not just the Lamplighters, but just like you as a person and like watching your unfolding.
Right. Yeah. You're the first person to push me to give a public speech. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember exactly where I was sitting when I wrote that email to you.
And now they can't shut me up.
Now they can't shut me up. Yeah. I am good in the sense that life is becoming more and more and more conscious for me, which means there's more and more and more stuff that's coming up always.
There's never a shortage of stuff.
There's never a shortage of stuff. And so it's a space of almost perpetual movement around being with what's happening inside. And so it feels like there was so much more absencing and numbing way back. And now there's like very little place to run and hide.
So, is what you're saying that, let's say, in the previous version of you, Lamplighters, right, that era of, and what you created was amazing, right? A school that, despite the fact that it no longer exists today, did educate many people, but it also, I think, successfully changed the conversation, at least in the Chabad community, around what is possible with education.
Yeah.
Despite the fact it's something amazing, you're saying that you are coming from an energy of doing, which is also an energy of escaping. If I'm
You know, when I started Lamplighters, there was the connection was deeply to this vision and this dream that I was almost obsessed about, but not so much connection to myself. Like my own story, my own healing, my own traumas, my own why. Like what was the fixation almost to the point where very little boundaries, very little capacity to say no, almost complete burnout. And when Lamplighters closed, and it was a tremendously challenging point in my life, my identity shifted, my career. And at the same time, you know, I think I've shared this with you, but the day that we were liquidating the assets for Lamplighters, which I was so nervous about, all this stuff that we had accumulated over years, that we had fundraised to
You're right.
buy, all the manipulatives and the books and the materials. For me, liquidating the assets meant a real kind of goodbye, like it was final. And I was sitting in the emergency room with my daughter, uh, you know, um, in the psychiatric unit. And so there was a tsunami of grief in my life, not just about this baby. I mean, it's a baby that had to close, but also just what is real in my life? Like who am I? Like the echo of the question, who am I? And being in that space of really having to sit with myself in that, like, who am I? If you take away all the stuff and the big accomplishment, and Lamplighters is such a gorgeous accomplishment that I'm so deeply proud of. If you take that all away, like what is here? Who am I? And so a big part of the last few years has been sitting with that and coming slowly over and over again, learning over and over again that who I am is whoever I am in this moment. That all that matters is where I am right now. And that for me is much more about connecting to like my being state. Not about so much about my doing state. Like, what do I do now? I do lots of really interesting, beautiful things. But I'm more concerned about like who I am.
Is one way of measuring that for someone who hasn't gone through that experience of when Lamplighters was going through that process of liquidating, they weren't liquidating just themselves. It was a part of you that was being lost. Whereas
Yeah.
now those things that you're doing, yes, you're doing them, but if they weren't there, you would still exist.
Yeah. I'll offer like an example.
Mm-hmm.
So when Lamplighters closed, it was not just, incredibly sad and there was a lot of grief. And I also felt like I went through like a public sort of dethroning in a certain
Right.
way, yeah. Um, but I had a lot of shame and I felt like I screwed up somehow or I could have done it differently. And it was really, really hard for me. I think it was the first time I sat with ayahuasca. And the spirit of Lamplighters came to me. Now, I felt very, very strongly since day one that Lamplighters was not just a school or an interesting educational model or whatever. It had a soul. Like, it had its own entity. It had its own vision, its own rhythm of unfolding. And I felt, as one of the founders, that I could feel the soul of the school. And so in the medicine space, the soul, the spirit, the substance of Lamplighters came to me. And I said to it, I said, if you're here to like bring me more shame and like remind me of all the ways in which I wasn't enough, like, you're not invited anymore. And in that moment, I think I sort of cut myself off from the life force of Lamplighters. And recently, very recently, I'm talking about in the last few weeks, coming back into this space of, because I also repressed.
In Search of More podcast has a sponsor officially. OKClarity.com is the place for anyone in the Jewish community, whether you're from, not from, religious, not religious, all that's cool, to find a therapist, psychiatrist, coach, nutritionist, anyone in the wellness space. So this ad is both for those people looking for any of the above. Find the right one. You can go on their website, scroll through their choices. If you don't find someone, they have a concierge service. Reach out to them, describe the issue, and they will help you. I've recommended many people their platform and have only heard good things. If you're a wellness professional, I also recommend joining the directory. They will get you business if you're good at what you do. OK Clarity also has an amazing WhatsApp status. Check them out there. We'll post a link, their website, WhatsApp, in our emails, and wherever you're watching this, in the show notes. Check them out and let them know the In Search of More podcast sent you.
Like myself as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as a renegade, as a rabble-rouser, I'm like, I'm not touching that part of me right now. Like, that part of me is burnt and tired and sad. Well, that part of me is me. And so the past few weeks, in really thinking about this community that we're building, I've been feeling like, can I really step back into that? And coming to this place of understanding that there's a part of me that doesn't want to betray Lamplighters, that's afraid of betraying the spirit of Lamplighters, and that I need to welcome that part back. Like, I exiled it, and I need to welcome it back.
What do you mean by betraying the spirit of Lamplighters?
How can I start something new when I invested so much into something so beautiful and it didn't work out? It's like, it almost feels like, let me pause for a second. It would feel like I'm betraying the spirit of Lamplighters if I started something new without honoring that impulse will still live on in something new. Like, when I said, right, like when I said to Lamplighters, like, you're not welcome here, it was like I exiled that part of me that holds the innovative spark.
Right. Oh, I understand.
You understand?
Yeah, it wasn't just Lamplighters you pushed away. You pushed away the part of you that created Lamplighters.
Yeah, so when you ask me, like, it's part of me that was, shut down or liquidated, it's like, yeah, there was a part of me that was shut down and liquidated that I'm only now starting to re-engage from a very different place.
Right. Do you feel like it carries the same risk? Because I don't look at Lamplighters as a failure. I mean, despite the fact that I put a lot of time and money into it, when I look back at the original reason I invested in Lamplighters,
yeah,
I felt like success, mission fulfilled.
Yeah, I don't think it was a failure either. I just wish it was still around.
Right. It is just in many different.
I wish that there was still a school in Crown Heights that offered that education. I wish it was still around. Yeah.
Right. No, I understand that.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't miss my job.
Yeah, I don't miss some of it either, to be honest. So
Yeah. That's hard at the end.
yeah, it was. It was. But I learned something about myself there as well.
What?
Um, A is about failure and success, right? It's not as clear cut as one may look at it. Like when I went into it, it was saying, "Hey, here's a school." I knew it was risky. Like I knew that going in, that it was something that was attempting to do the impossible, to create a school like this in a community like that. And that's why it was interesting. And I actually used it for years as an example of, I would say I'm conservative in business, but I'm aggressive in charity. So it's something that I took a risk on. And yeah, you take a risk on something that lives for 10 years, that's a success in that way. The other part is that it, by the time Lamplighters closed, there were already so many others that had done it in their way. And yes, it would be great if it still lived on, but at what price? Would it still have lived on without me attached to it? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I think there was a lot of us along the way that were so invested, and that was beautiful. And there's another side to that investment, and it's kind of like a catch-22. Like it was one of the hardest moments of my life, like that period, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The fact that in some way, right, like the divine design, the fact that the school closed, and that portal of having to reassess and come to terms with my self-worth being something outside of what I do in this world, and just my healing journey since then. I feel so blessed.
Right. It sounds like there's two parts to the evolution of letting go of Lamplighters. One is I am not Lamplighters.
Yeah.
Like I'm something, but also I'm not Lamplighters.
Yeah. Oh, well said. I mean, I am Yocheved, and Yocheved holds Lamplighters, and Lamplighters is reforming itself in some sort of way.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then here's an opportunity with a new community to, because I think some of what went wrong with Lamplighters, I'll finish that question in a second, but some of what went wrong with Lamplighters was the stubbornness to the original vision. Not the vision. That would have been fine. You know, Jeff Bezos has a quote, he says, we have to be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details. And Lamplighters was a little stubborn on the details, a little bit. Like it had to look like this, and I was like, no, it's not going to survive looking like that. Like you cannot build a school the way you wanted and have a shortfall of $15,000.
Yeah.
So it's
There was lots of
not possible. There were things that weren't going to work.
Yeah.
But the overall vision could have existed if there wasn't as much almost control on the details. Like it wasn't from one person. I think it was from all of us, that there was something that there was like an energy, like we're fighting against something, and we needed to bring that energy in order for it to continue to exist.
Yeah, there was definitely some of that, for sure.
We had to push out this noise and that noise and that noise, and then the noise from God also.
And the noise from God. Yeah, God was trying to speak to us this whole time and didn't listen. Yeah, and it had to happen that way.
Maybe. Maybe we can always
we'll probably still argue about this.
Right. But in terms of the evolution of this new community, to bring that in a way that's has all the beauty of it without that strong attachment.
Well, I think that, you know, if I think about myself as a person, my sort of arc, I'm somebody who always has had, struggle is the right word, but a particular relationship with belonging. It's been challenging for me in certain ways, and yet I feel like there's something in me that can generate a feeling of belonging in others. And probably because of my own belonging stuff. And I've always been passionate about community and people coming together and storytelling and spiritual ecstasy and depth and emotional depth and connection and authenticity and all these things that showed up in many different ways in my life. And I think Lamplighters was less about an educational model for me always. It was more about how do we build communities with healing at the center? How do you build a community that's authentically about the individual, and that the alchemy, the ecosystem of that community is essentially healing. And part of...
Can you define this word healing a little bit? Is it therapy? Is it something different than?
I think healing can be therapeutic. I think healing is about shedding the layers and being connected to self and really being with what is and having spaciousness and presence.
So a community where the individual doesn't get lost.
That's a way to say it. It's a way to say it.
I feel like that's the struggle. Meaning, if you take like the, let's take the American value system,
Mm-hmm.
definitely prides the individual. I don't know what's going on now, right? There's been some debate over the American value system. So I'm not talking about 2023 American value system, but you know, if you said American values in 1995 or something,
Okay.
right? I won't even pick a time when it was a Republican president, right? 1995, we would understand that independence and the value of the individual, and that's a core American value. If you take something like, I don't know, Islam, they don't pretend to value the individual. It's not. They won't. I don't think any Islamic person would be offended if I say that it's community and submission to the community, and that is the highest ordeal. I think Judaism, in theory, tries to combine both. A religion that prides itself on, you know, community and society, but at the same point in time, a single life is a whole world. Concepts like that.
Right.
But somewhere it gets lost along the way. And is that what you're saying when you say a community around healing? Because the word confused me a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect. And what it brings up for me is that we can get obsessed with hyper individuation, like the individual, but we can get obsessed with the individual to the point where we all feel separate. So I'm so connected to my individuality that I ultimately feel so alone and separate. But I feel like the way we hold both, to be an individual and community, is if we're aware that we're interconnected. Like when you actually know that you're part of something bigger, then that allows us to feel like we're part of something bigger. And that opens up so much for us.
And how do we maintain the individual aspect
in that space?
In that space, yeah.
I think when you feel that you matter, when your voice is heard, when you're witnessed in your process, when you can contribute, when you're a part of something, when your life has meaning, when people aren't trying to shut you up or tell you that your actions aren't meaningful or that you don't count.
Right. When we talk about story, I think that's one way of saying it, right? That say, okay, us two are here, right? Does my story up until this moment matter? Up until this, is any difference? Like now we're part of a community. Is there something, does it influence this thing, this space, this community, this group in some way, or does all of that have to get shed and lost just because I joined?
Right. Is there a sense that my wholeness somehow adds to the wholeness of the collective?
Right.
Maybe
that's where the Baal Tshuva movement got it wrong.
Say more.
It felt like the worst thing you can tell a Baal Tshuva, maybe not all of them, about Tshuva, right? So someone who, like my parents, who decided to become religious and join the Chabad movement, was that, you did that, right? You actually are a Baal Tshuva. You're actually someone who wasn't at some point. And it's like, how did you know? Was I doing something wrong that you can,
something gave it
that
away.
You can tell? Right. Was that everyone? That was most.
I mean, I surely felt that as a kid. I had to like hide that part of me that would give away that I wasn't so good at hiding it though.
Right.
Like, what gave it away? Dark skin and a name Elham. There
Right.
was no
Right.
hiding. Um, yeah, belonging is a big one, and how we create belonging. I don't see how we do it without really honoring the self and giving a container for people to feel like they matter.
And is there within this, right, the balance of the individual and the community is, I'm going to use the word religion. I don't necessarily mean as religion, God, spirituality. Is that a necessary component, an added component? Is that, where does that fit into this equation? Meaning in your community, that's
Well,
a
I want to say that
component.
our community is evolving, so I want to like it's like a
Right.
work in progress that's very much rooted, I think, in our journeys. Um, I don't see how we do any sort of healing work or create connection without inviting the divine. Because if I'm talking about like how we're all interconnected, like that's the juice,
Right.
that's the juice. And part of my evolution, if we're using this is the word that we're using today, part of my story since Lamplighters is my own healing work and really like a lot of therapy and at some point um, different training, coaching training programs, um, focus on Jewish meditation and studying that, and coming across someone named Thomas Hubel, who's one of the world's experts on collective trauma, who's developed a model that combines mystical teachings, psychology, and somatic wisdom in healing trauma. And I'm just about done with a 2-year training that I've been in with him
Nice.
and about 400 people from across the world. And for me, going through this training, which is incredibly intense and moving and rich and evocative and very hard and so beautiful, is exactly this. It's that triangle of seeing individuals share their stories, witness them, connect, be with in the here and now in their being with difficult, hard parts of themselves, in a place, in a collective where they are being witnessed and held and seen and not judged, but just loved. And you just feel God in that space. Like it's a temple, it's a freaking temple. And it's like that triangle of myself being witnessed in communion by another. I feel like that's the recipe to invite deep spirituality. Like,
Right. It's almost like you don't need to do it. As soon as you try to bridge that gap, the only way it's going to happen
yeah,
is if.
that's what I'm saying. Sorry, the being and doing. There's nothing to do. To authentically be in whatever I am right now in this moment invites God.
And I guess by bringing that example, you've excluded the idea of religion from that. Like that's not a necessary component because you're saying there's 400 people. I'm sure not of the same.
Well, this particular training happens to be extremely spiritually minded. I say that, yeah, it's people from all kinds of
Right. And
backgrounds.
nevertheless, there's a sense of the divine
And
that.
in some ways, actually, I feel more comfortable talking about God, and I hear more talk about God there than I do in religious circles.
Of course.
There's no, it's not taboo to talk about the divine. Um, there's plenty of religious trauma in this space, but the existence and the felt sense of God, it feels like it's a given, and it's actually really freeing. It's really freeing.
It's funny you say that. It's not taboo to talk about the divine
Yeah,
because it is. It is for sure.
yeah. There's
I've never met a religious person who's not afraid of spirituality.
say more.
I think it goes hand in hand. I think that's. I'm not putting down religion
Mm.
necessarily. I'm not saying it from that perspective. I'm saying that that maybe the art is to somehow bridge the two. Not that it goes naturally together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I definitely think there's something about ritual, you know? Um, I have a dear friend that I've met in this training, and she's always saying how she was raised without ritual, and how she feels her life is missing so many anchor points because of that. And so ritual and practice does act, I think, as some sort of hook. How
For
do we,
sure.
right? Integration of it. So there is a place, in religion, spiritual practice, ritual for sure. Um, but you can have religion that's completely devoid of God.
Well, I think even more so. Not that you could have that. That is the risk.
Right.
Meaning,
And I think it's a risk that they were willing to take.
right,
Yeah.
right. And that's what I think we're not being honest enough about. Is that I'm wrestling with this with my own children. Is what sort of school to put them into,
Right.
and
You don't want to start one?
what
You don't want to start one?
I, there's a lot of trauma there. But actually, I'm not joking. Every time I think about it, and there have been some conversations recently, because there is, I don't want to say an opportunity to start one, but an opportunity to get very involved with influencing one
Yeah.
in a direction that could possibly be helpful towards my family and to others. There is definitely some trauma associated with it, which it shouldn't be, because A, it was a success, and B, it was like, if anything, I'm better equipped. I learned something from it, but maybe I need to drink a little more ayahuasca. So, but that being said, what I'm looking at with my children is, okay, I can kind of do one of two things, and they both have risks. It's not a pro or con. There's not one is good and one is bad. This is where I see it. You tell me if I'm wrong. Is one is I could introduce them to, let's say, a very Jewish school with all of the ritual and all of the practice, but then run the risk of them having all of those details
Right.
and then having to somehow infuse God into this down the road when they
Right.
already know it.
Right.
And the other is to make it much easier for them to infuse God into these practices later on, because it'll be introduced kind of together in a way that they can accept it together, but then not know the rituals. Like, I quite like the fact that as I don't know, growing spiritually, I have a lot of this Jewish language
Yeah.
and this Jewish heritage to tap into, and I find it very helpful. But that doesn't mean it was always helpful. There were times where it was quite the opposite. And maybe the way I would kind of put a bow on this point is, in recovery, when I was sponsoring someone. So recovery, the central principle of the 12 steps of recovery is that this is a program for people who have not found healing, and the only way they're going to is through a spiritual program. So if you could find healing through a therapist, then God bless you. But kind of the last door on the block is this one, after you've tried all the others.
Right.
But this one requires a spiritual program. And if you told me here was a guy who was struggling with addiction, and I was going to sponsor, I was going to, work on help bringing him into the spiritual program. If you told me he grew up religious, didn't matter which, if he grew up with religious ritual, I would take a deep breath. I was like, wow, this is going to be a hell of a lot
There's
tougher.
some deprogramming that's going to
Right, there's going to be a lot of work.
Man, I wish I had the answer to that question, because I'm struggling with my own kids about this. What is the recipe that kids need so that as adults they're conscious, God-loving, have Judaism in their life, have a healthy relationship with ritual, feel proud of their Judaism? Like what? And I don't know.
There was,
I don't know.
we used to talk about this, but it was just said as a story. Maybe there's much more, it obviously there's much more meaning, but there was a whole argument of whether to put the oral Torah into writing, right? There was the part of the Torah that was written and the rest was oral. And at some point in time, rabbis said, okay, we got it. We must, because otherwise it's going to get lost. But what do you mean we must? Why wasn't it done before if it was such a good thing to do? It's because they understood that there's a risk. I'm not sure what that is, what that risk was.
Well, I think it points to the
Maybe it's
power
this.
of transmission. Like, I think at some point, the cost benefit was like, there's something so powerful in transmission and learning from your elders and being part of the conversation. And then probably when there was the fear arose. I don't know if they got afraid in those days. Maybe they didn't get afraid. But let's say even spiritual people get afraid that they might lose something by continuing this generational transmittive activity. Then they probably came to write it. But I think the fact that for so many generations it wasn't really like what you were saying, like there was space for us to actually like tell our stories and talk about it and share and learn something from your elders.
Right. I think it was possible that they were worried. They were obviously saying we're going to lose something if we write it. But if we don't write it, we're going to lose everything.
Right.
So it's worth it to write it, but not because writing it was a good thing. You know, I've thought about one of the things that have given me an appreciation for ritual. Like my Shabbos is much different now, the Friday night, and the way I conduct it because of what I've seen in ayahuasca ceremonies, actually.
Really?
Like the ritual and the sacredness around that. And sacred is not a religious word, right? Doesn't mean it was religious. Just there's a certain quality to it in the way you're prepared before and the way you eat, and then when they come in and the language that's used and small things, right? For example, I know one person I've worked with, is a shaman. He'll always make sure the glass he serves in is nice. It's not going to be a plastic cup or something like that. It'll be oftentimes there are times where it's been a Kiddush cup because that was something that he felt was okay, more like the most appropriate thing he has, but it would never be some standard glass. And I thought that's one aspect of it. Besides a mat that's placed and different things that are said and clothing that's worn, there's a certain rituals that are practiced in order to connote the reverence, the sacredness of whatever we're about to embark on. And I thought, oh, how cool! Like this is some of what we're doing with the Shabbos. But I think what happens sometimes is if I was trying to describe this ceremony to you, and I said, oh, he uses a silver cup, and he sits cross-legged, and he makes sure to sit in the center of the room, and he puts this here, and he says that, and then if you can start obsessing over the details, was the cup big enough? Was it not? You can get all lost in that versus what I think we want to ask is, but why?
Yeah.
Like what? Meaning it's not about the thing as much as it is the intention behind that thing.
It's interesting that you're raising this because it's connected for me with the oral law and the writing of the oral law. I teach now fairly regularly. I teach very regularly. And during Sfira, the weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, Passover and the receiving of the Torah, I was teaching a particular piece on Rabbi Akiva. It's a fascinating sikha that I kind of did my own little twist around, very connected to healing. And there's this idea that because Rabbi Akiva came from converts and he really struggled with like an imposter syndrome in a sense, and he had to redefine his sense of self, he was the one ultimately who becomes the pillar for the oral law. Because the oral law is all about nuance. We would never learn nuance without the oral law. And so only somebody who's really had to re-examine and redefine their identity understands nuance in that sense, like what it means to really like dig deep and have to feel out the details. And the whole consciousness of the oral law is exactly that. It matters. The details matter. But where we get lost is like which details really, like what you're saying.
And what do they matter for?
And what do they matter for? And then at what point do we say like we have this code that's so sacred and so important, and yet also like my sense of self matters too. You know, like when you police women to the point that you are objectifying them and you're staring at the length of their skirts.
That's not very modest.
That might be the nuance of the law, but that's not at all about what the law wants.
Right, it strips out the spirit and the process.
Right, and it strips out the sense of self and all of that. So it matters, but what is the it, and who gets to decide? And I think this is also connected to the healing. Is like, am I connected with myself? Like, do I know what matters for me?
So if it wasn't transmitted the way it is, right, written, so how would it have been? What was the What was the alternative? What was the right way to get this? What was happening back then?
Well, up until then, it literally was transmitted generation.
Right. So I wasn't going to give you
And
a
there was the shamans. They held the secrets, like they
right.
knew.
Right. Right. Meaning, if like I'm not going to write down Shabbos for you, that would be a little risky to just put it here. Here's the pamphlet of Shabbos. Go do this. Like they might totally screw it up. Come, experience it with me,
Mm.
and then you'll know.
And then you'll feel.
And then and then you'll understand why I chose to have
Mm.
2 loaves of bread, or maybe for what I was looking for that evening, I went to the full 12 or 14 or whatever different customs used for different reasons. But the risk of just putting in writing is almost like, okay, this is how I do it. Good. Like, let me check down that list. It makes me think of the word ineffable, which is we can't put words to it.
Yeah.
And then we put words to it, we F it up.
Yeah, ineffable.
It's totally effable now that we put words to it.
Yeah, and it's static and boring.
It runs a risk of it.
Yeah.
It runs a risk of it. Yeah. I'm actually going after this conversation. I'm going to look into that more. Like, what are some of the reasons why we called it the oral law? We still call it the oral law.
Yeah.
Right? And the oral Torah, actually. The oral
Yeah.
Torah, like, what was the risk? What were they worried about putting into writing? Put into writing.
Yeah.
And are we living that risk?
Yeah.
And how do we continue to avoid that risk?
And how do we honor the innovative spark in a world that is writing it down,
Right.
I mean, I think about the work that I'm drawn to. I've done a lot of work in gender leadership since the school closed, and in the Orthodox community specifically. I led a research project for over a year studying, understanding Orthodox Jewish leadership, specifically women, and spoke to hundreds of women from across the spectrum of the community who are in leadership. And I'm just very interested in the topic. And
I wonder why.
And I recognize this part of myself because my husband and I, Yessi and I, we started, we're founding this community together. And last Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, I should say, Chabad of Atlanta hired me to be their scholar in residence.
Cool.
Yeah, which was like, they felt like, it was pretty like avant-garde of them. It was an amazing experience. I ran the learner service. And it was a very, very powerful experience for me. I love to teach. I love to connect. And it was a big turning point for me. And I was sharing this experience with some of my students, my friends. And they said, would you do something like that for Yom Kippur? And I said, yes. We had a minyan for Yom Kippur where it was an Orthodox minyan, a Chabad minyan, but I was holding the space. I was standing at the front. I was sharing Torah. I was leading meditations. You would call me a rabbi if I wasn't a woman. And I know that there's millions of places where that wouldn't be innovative, where it would be completely normal for a woman to stand up in front of a community during prayer and during ritual and be the one who's teaching and holding the space. But I love that I get to do it in a place where it's not.
Yeah. So you kind of want it to continue to be.
Yeah, so this is like something I'm grappling with. Like, Yocheved, why do I don't have to do it in Crown Heights. Like,
right.
But no, I actually want to. I want to be in work that is pushing the boundaries just a bit. That's in that tension. It's like in the written and the oral space, right? And we've had the minyan now for a number of months, and it's really beautiful, and it feels traditional, and it feels familiar, and it feels just different enough that, like, I think it creates a pause.
And how do you ensure that it doesn't push too far? What's the check on? What's the check on you?
There's a mechitza, and the chazan is a man. So Yossi usually, my husband usually is the one who leads the davening, and I sit behind the mechitza, And that feels right. Like that feels good. Feels like that's the check. There's still
Right.
segregation of the sexes.
Right. That's kind of it's segregation, but not relegated to
Right,
the back of the room.
right. And the first time we had the meeting in Crown Heights for Yom Kippur, and it was really emotional. I felt like I was, my great grandfather was a rabbi of a shul in Tehran in Iran, and I really felt like I was channeling him and that he was really present with me. And standing there the first time, like I spoke in front of, it was really packed. I think we had like 60, 70 people. Um, and standing there, standing in a place that in our community is typically held by a man, and looking at the woman and just feeling what it is for the woman to see a sister standing, sharing Torah, holding space, and then looking at the men's section and seeing and feeling to what it is for the men to see a woman standing there and sharing and holding space. And in that moment, I felt like there was something so healing happening. Something really important was melting. And I'm not saying this is the model that it has to be or that I'm holding the stake for this, but like
Right. If you go to it has to be, then you're becoming
exactly
right.
that. I'm not dogmatic, but like there's something happening here, and it's really beautiful, and I love to be a part of it. I love to be a part of it.
Is the reason it isn't traditionally practiced? Is that a law that was there, or just the way
I
it kind
mean,
of
look, this
evolved over
is
time?
there are laws around female spiritual leadership, um, and the way that shows up practically is maybe women don't get rabbinic degrees, or they're not heading synagogues, or in many Orthodox communities, they're not even sitting on school boards.
Right.
So you have, shuls and schools who don't have women on their boards, and they will find a halachic
Backing.
backing for this.
Right. Just like there's halachic backing for, in some Orthodox communities, they'll remove the women completely from like any images.
Correct.
Right. And
Correct.
others, rabbis find it okay. So it's not like there's a hard and fast rule, you're saying,
Correct.
across
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
There are different people who can come to the same conclusion with Jewish Jewish law as their backing.
Yeah. And then is it about the law or is it about something else?
I don't know. I guess the problem is that once you start pushing it too far, then you end up with whatever anyone wants, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is something. Maybe it's certainly about the spirit of the law. Like there was something that was intended. Therefore, there's in the Torah there's a law about not taking what do you call it when you loan someone money and you take a
Ribis?
collateral? No, collateral.
Oh.
So someone loaned money to someone and they say, okay, I'm going to take, I don't know, whatever. I'll take your pot as collateral. Make sure your watch is collateral. So if someone loans money to a widow, not to take it as collateral. Not take any collateral, just loan. Just do a straight loan. But the question comes up, what if the widow is wealthy?
Okay.
Right? So is the law or is the spirit of the law that has to be followed?
Right.
And then maybe the fact that it uses a widow, then it's saying anyone who's impoverished would be in the same situation, right? So it becomes, even though the words say a certain thing, we can get into this debate over, did you mean the spirit? Did you mean the words?
Right.
Did you mean the spirit, but we still follow the words?
Is it the silver cup? Is it not?
Right. Right. You can get into this, and
Right.
that's what makes some of it fun. If we debate over this, we maybe get into less trouble in other areas of our life.
We're avoiding other conversations.
Or avoiding other problems sometimes also.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right. But certainly avoiding other conversations, that's for sure. Yeah. But I think what it certainly does, which I like, which is some of what I liked about Lamplighters, is so much of the things that we practice, we assume there's some reason we do it, but there sometimes isn't. So just when someone pushes it, maybe they did push too far. Maybe they did, but now let's have a conversation about where that is. Because It's not as if everything is working so swimmingly well.
Yeah, and one conversation is women's leadership.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of women, it definitely is.
Right. I mean, you
Yeah.
mentioned at some point in this conversation that you were in a psychiatric ward, right? At some point. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned the specifics. I don't want to share
My child,
software.
yeah.
Right. So those kind of experiences could put a lot of things into question very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Right.
I remember you were really helpful to me at that
Thank you.
time. I appreciate that deeply.
Thank you.
Yeah. I remember when we were going through that, I was talking to somebody whose child had attempted older than my child, and I reached out for support. And she said, if your child has like cancer or there's some sort of physical ailment, everyone rallies together, understandably, of course, and is praying for your child and is making you dinner and all of these things. But when there's an invisible illness, when a child is suffering from mental illness, most families don't know. Most families don't share. And I remember like at that time, and people will come up to me like, Yocheved, how are you? How are you? How is it since Lamplighter is closed? I started to hate that question. And what I felt like I couldn't really say was like, Lamplighter, screw Lamplighter. It was like, I'm in this whole other place with my child, you know, that is so much harder um, than an organization
And why did you feel
closing.
like you couldn't say that?
Well, first, I think there's an interesting thing around like what's mine to share. I still feel that. Um, there's parts of it that are my story as a mother, but there's parts of it that are not mine to share.
Right. I wrestle with that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I still have, I mean, you can probably hear it in my voice. Like I'm still like unsure. Um, and I believe at the right time, this child of mine who's incredible will find an opportunity to share. So there's a bit of that, like what's mine to share. And I did have a strong sense of support, thank God. But it's like, it's hard to talk about.
Right.
It's hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about. I don't know if it's stigma per se, but it's just really, really hard to talk about.
Is it hard to talk about because you feel not because it's emotional? So you seem okay talking about emotional things. Is it hard to talk about because you're concerned about being misunderstood?
No, it's emotional.
Just because it is
It's
emotional,
emotional.
right?
Yeah, it's
Okay, sorry
emotional.
for that.
Yeah. And it's I don't I don't know, I'm going to make a blanket statement. I don't know if a parent of a child who's had mental health struggles doesn't at some point go through a process of like, how am I to blame here? Like, what could I have done differently? Like, what? And, to know that your child is suffering and to have any part of you that feels like, I could have fixed this, I could have prevented this, I could have is just it's so hard. It's so hard to know that I couldn't protect my child from that kind of pain.
Right.
And it's really hard to live as much as I can. I'm spiritual and believe in divine providence and all that stuff. It's very hard not to feel that maybe it could have been different. Um, and to hold that still with the feeling of like you are perfect exactly the way you are. Like you're not a mistake. Like my child, you're perfect. And like, man, I wish I could have prevented that for you. Like I really wish I could have. And if I in some way contributed to it, I'm like, I'm so sorry. There's no sense making of a young child, a young person suffering. There's no There's no making sense of it.
And where are you now with it?
Um, I feel less connected to the narrative that like I somehow brought it on or screwed up or that I could have fixed it or prevented it. I'm less connected to that. I definitely have moments where I feel like it could have been different. Um, and like that certain here and here is again where I feel that tension between what's mine to share, but I still definitely visit the sense of like a grief around my child having suffered. And it's beautiful to witness the resilience. The
Right.
resilience is gorgeous.
She's in a much better place today.
Yes.
Awesome. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we spoke earlier about Rabbi Akiva and nuance, and there's certain things that are like ideas that are so nuanced. Like we go a little bit too far off into one direction, we're off. We go a little bit too far off in the other way, and we're far off. But when you say, you said it's so hard not to struggle with the idea that I could have done something about it in the past. Do you connect the fact that she's doing better to the fact that you're doing better
Hmm.
as well, without going too far with
Yeah.
that idea?
I feel like she, in many ways, was the catalyst for the growth and healing in our family, and um, so I feel like my work has ripples in the family system, and I feel an enormous amount of gratitude to her. I feel like she was the impetus in many ways, and so
Right. And you had
her
said that
work
because you
affects me. Her healing work touches me as much as my healing work would touch her.
said she was the impetus for the whole family to change.
Um, yeah, in many ways, we having to go to just my own therapy, intensive therapy. At some point, my husband going to therapy, going to family therapy, being involved, having to look at our behaviors and understand our parenting and um, to come to terms with even just like how my work and my advocacy like was challenging for the family. And
Could there be
it was a
something?
wake up call. It was a really hard wake up call in many
Right.
ways.
Right. But it did. It did. And too often you see that it doesn't. There could be something else also. I'm reading a book. I think it's called Didn't Start With You or something like that.
Oh
Didn't Start
yeah.
With You.
Wait, is that Oprah? No.
No.
Okay, it
Um,
doesn't matter.
there's another one like similar.
Or
Like
like
similar.
what happened to you? That's
Yeah, that's what
Oprah.
happened
Yeah,
to you. This
okay,
It
yeah,
didn't
okay.
start with you. And it talks about, it shares a story of an individual who started, like, I think he was 19 years old and he was unable to sleep.
Mm.
And just suddenly it came on. He was an athlete till then, healthy, and I think in some sort of, collegiate sports. And suddenly he wasn't able to sleep at 19. And he did everything to try to figure it out. Eventually came across the doctor who wrote this book. And instead of diagnosing, listened to his story, and eventually it came out that his uncle or grandfather was murdered at 19 in a very um, specific way. Not murdered. I'm sorry, not murdered. Something happened where he got trapped in the cold and died in the cold at 19. And it was an uncle, right? Not a grandfather. It was an uncle who it happened to. And he was kind of still living with
Yeah.
that trauma, like it still existed with him. And once the doctor understood that his trauma had kind of gone into him, then it's not the uncle's fault. He's
Right.
not here anymore. But the uncle's no longer here, obviously, in that case, but there are other cases where the person is connected. And the way he explains it is a much more compassionate way. It sounds so awful to say that, you know, trauma travels through generations. Like, what would be the usefulness of trauma traveling through generations? And there actually is a usefulness. If there's a society where, I don't know, around snakes, and snakes are dangerous and someone
Right.
got hurt by it, then why make this person go through the same thing? Let's just program the DNA that the next person gets this idea. But sometimes something that happens is not a common occurrence, and it's not a possible occurrence in this generation. And now you have someone living with a programming that's
Yeah.
useless, but it's not useless in all scenarios. So some of it have been not like your parenting could have been different, or your advocacy work could have been different. Just there was something unhealed
Yeah.
inside of you that, without even knowing, it's not a choice, without even knowing, kind of gets passed on. And then once one family member
Yeah. I mean,
breaks
a
that,
lot of
everyone does.
the healing work and this training that I'm in is looking at the ancestral piece. And man, we all carry so much. I remember one of the first things, we have a lot of retreats, like online retreats and in-person retreats. And it's mostly process work and watching other people in process. And I remember one of the first teachings, one of the first retreats, somebody asked the question about, why am I still, like, you know, we can be in therapy and figure, why am I still doing that thing, or I can't. And he offered something that when he shared it, it's so simple, but I remember I was just crying as I felt so much compassion in it. The still, like why we're still, is because for so long that was intelligent of us. Like that,
Right.
it was not a function of our brokenness, it was a function of our intelligence, you know. I I've I have a part of me that kind of is numb. And I've gotten to know my numbness very, very intimately, more and more. And part of the intimacy is understanding the intelligence of my numbness. That for a huge part of my childhood, the only way I could survive all of my intensity and the intensity around me was to go numb. And when I touch the intelligence of it, wow, like I'm actually like, there's brilliance here.
Right. Thank
There's
you.
brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Exactly. Thank you. And so it's the same thing with the generational trauma. You know, things get passed down because that's how our ancestors coped, and there's resilience in that coping. And then the question is just like, what do I invite and I keep in and I say thank you and still integrate, and what am I ready to let go of?
Right. What do I say thank you and goodbye, and what do I say thank you?
Yeah, and
You can
but
stay.
even just being able to let go, I can only let go really until I've like seen and felt the intelligence of it.
Yeah. That lands.
Yeah.
One of the things coming up for me is going back to your daughters, just how often families miss that with a child, where and that's why I'd like to hear how you made the transition from, it's not just our family is okay and here's one of our children struggling, but no, there's something we all have to work on. I say have to is maybe not the right word. Another way of saying could be something we all could work on. Like any one of us can choose to undo this knot. It lives in all of us. Any one of us can choose to undo it, and all of us will be free of that. So I'd say, I mean, I get calls, because of these conversations from people, and it's almost never from the person who needs the help, which is pretty frustrating. I mean, it is always from the person who needs the help. I shouldn't say.
Right.
It's almost the person
always
is
talking
almost
about somebody
exactly.
else.
It's
Right,
almost
right,
never.
right.
It's always from the person who needs the help.
Right.
Keep
right.
that in, but
Yeah.
you don't have to edit that out. Yeah. It's always from the person who needs that help, needs the help, but they're almost always calling about someone else they think needs the help, and the work need is like, no, of course, this is you, and I have many examples of this, but I had a conversation not too long ago with parents who are frustrated about a child in drug and alcohol rehab for years, over and over and over again. And the way they've completely othered him. And none of our other kids have this problem. It's just him. Okay, maybe he's like the most sensitive of all, and he's picking up on something that you all can benefit from.
Yeah.
And so how did you make that shift? Because it is hard, because it sounds so much, and I know the resistance to it, it sounds so much like blame. And it's not blame. It sounds like blame. You know what they say, vulnerability, we hate it in ourselves, but we love seeing it in others.
That's a good one.
So it's kind of the same thing. It's like, it sounds like blame only to the person who's saying it about themselves, but to anyone else, it sounds so empowering, I think. It's like, wow, I can do something about this problem. I don't have to wait till my kid who's been in rehab for 10 years and can't figure out how to stop drinking and drugging. I don't have to wait for them to figure it out in order for this problem to be figured out.
Yeah.
Like, I can do something that everyone can do something about. So what was that? How did you shift into, I need to go into my own healing? Like, how did your daughter crack you?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many places I can go with this. Because first I want to say it's still a work in progress. Like, I don't like to present like, I think on a practical level, the fact that I was going through this, that lamplighters happen at the same time.
Right.
It was like just this portal of having to re-examine my life. And it didn't make sense to look at what my child was going through as an isolated thing. It felt like there's something bigger happening here. And I remember from the school, it's like we had this idea of like the canary in the coal mine, that sometimes it's the kid that is struggling that's actually pointing to something in the ecosystem. And I think that's a knowing that's been in me. Like, it's going back to what we talked about, the interconnectedness. I feel like there's some part of me that deeply feels that and knows that. And it doesn't feel true to me. Even though I can look at myself and wonder what I could have done maybe, it doesn't feel true to me to not feel that we're all connected in the family and that there's something that we all share here. Yeah, it just doesn't feel true.
Right. It's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true. It's like anything, it's like we're all connected so deeply. And the idea that it's not like a tumor that you just kind of like cut out.
Right. Yeah.
And
I mean, I guess what you're saying is, you said there are a lot of different places you could have gone, but the place you did go is that you had the gift of kind of another tragedy, for lack of a better word, right? That this school
I was already in the muck.
Well, which is right, that's, I mean,
yeah, because
that's the gift of it.
Yeah.
I'm convinced, I don't want to say convinced, but my perspective today, it's okay to have wrong perspectives if it makes us feel better. But my perspective today is that were I not sexually abused as a child, my whole family would be in a very different place today.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the reason is that there was kind of this is a, I don't know, like I think this is a Jewish idea almost at this point, so much trauma, which is like, oh, it's okay to struggle. It's okay. Life is hard. Why is life hard? Why? Why does it have to be hard? It's not hard for everyone. It's hard for some people. Well, who's it not hard for? Let's learn from them. But no, not the Jewish way. We got to like struggle and wallow in it and, lament every single day about the tragedies and the past and the pain, and it's normal.
But there's something there though. Just kind of interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
There's a difference between like everyone struggles, and part of the recipe, the divine design of growth is through struggle. That's like one narrative.
But it doesn't go there.
But what messes it up is the victim consciousness that gets thrown around in there. Like that I'm a victim, therefore, like that we're victims, therefore.
This is different than the victim.
That's what I think. This
is different than the victim, because the victim is almost easier to identify. This is more the martyr than the victim.
Okay. But
this
still,
is like,
that thread.
You don't know how miserable my day was. Oh yeah, mine was even worse.
Right.
But it's different because the victim, like, why do you feel so weak? No, I don't feel weak. I feel powerful. I'm a martyr. I walked through hell to get here. Do you know what I did?
Interesting. Okay, but you were saying about
Or an example maybe, just someone, a number of people have asked me, isn't psychedelic therapy a shortcut? Let's say it is. Like, do we have to take the
why
long,
does
hard
it
way?
have to be so hard?
Why does this thing
Right,
have to be?
right.
So I think in my family and in many other wonderful Jewish families, this idea of suffering as being not only okay, but it's part of the program, and not suffering to eventually get to the other side, suffering for suffering's sake. Life is hard, and don't complain about it. Just, this is what it is. I think that existed, and it certainly existed in my family, and it wasn't going to be an average problem that someone was experiencing to say, okay, go check this out. It wasn't going to be,
It needed to be something.
oh, you're kind of depressed. Don't give me
Right.
kind of depressed.
Right.
Don't even give me you thought about, right? You thought about hurting yourself. I need like the real
Right.
deal. And there was something, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, but there was something in my family around sexual abuse that this felt like enough to everyone.
Right.
So it's like, oh, he can go to therapy. Like that's
Right.
he went through something. And I felt like I could. Like, oh,
Yeah,
this was
the
enough.
permission was granted.
Right. And then,
Wow.
2 years later, I'm not talking about the sexual abuse because it was
The tip.
it was
of
a
the-
nothing
yeah,
of the
yeah.
problem that was really
Correct.
going on.
Right.
It was, if in the scheme of things, it was nothing.
Right.
I'm not minimizing the pain and the difficulty that it came from it, but it was nothing in the scheme of like the actual stuff that was going on for me. And in some ways it was the
I'm
best thing.
sorry you had to go through what you went through.
Oh, but
in
I don't
order
see
to-
I don't
in
see
order
it as
to do that.
right, I don't
To
see
be
it as
that
that.
catalyst in your family.
Right, I don't see it as that. I see it as chose it.
That you chose it on some level.
Yeah, 100%.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Can I sit
So-
with that for 1 second? Because that's a lot. That's a big statement.
I feel that. I feel that deeply.
Yeah.
Like someone's going to, right?
Yeah.
What's better? What's better for us all to live in denial, in misery and suffering forever, or for one to say, yeah, I'll take it. What's that for a period of time is a hell of a lot better than this forever.
That's not the martyr, right?
What?
That's not the martyr.
No, because I'm not sitting there. I'm not asking for anything
Yeah,
today
No, you're
from
giving
it.
back.
Now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a story.
Now I'm sitting with the curiosity of that pivot of what it takes to feel that I chose this for the sake of the betterment, the healing, the uplifting of my family. Like,
Right. And when I say
that feels like a huge pivot from all the messages and all the
right, and we spoke about nuance before, and saying this at the wrong time is the most insensitive, callous thing to say.
Right, of course.
Right, like you invert it and you've
Yeah.
screwed it all up.
Yeah, and only you can say it.
Exactly.
I can't say that for you.
Correct.
I haven't spoken that much about my own sexual trauma. It's like not one of the things I've like spoken that much about, even though I've spoken about lots of other things. But one struggle that I've had around speaking about it is that victim and survivor, both of those hats don't speak to me. And so like I have not yet found the way in which I can speak to my own trauma in that way.
Right.
And that's something that we each have to, and that particular thread of my trauma, there's others, but that particular thread I haven't yet. The closest I've come to is living with, but it's not something somebody else can tell me. Like I can't tell you how to look at your trauma. Like you have to come to that. You have to like choose that.
Right. But I'll say something else. It wasn't, I couldn't say that I chose this and that my mother didn't choose to be the mother who had to look at her child who was. Right. So it's not like, okay, you guys are all a bunch of blind people and I'm the one who raised my hand and
We
I'll say,
chose
take
this.
it. Yeah, there was a choosing of, I mean, something shifting, right? Something in
Yeah.
that collective consciousness, however you want to say it. And it kind of takes it takes multiple people from multiple angles doing multiple things in order for the denial to be shattered.
Yeah.
Which I think that's what it is when we talk about godliness, and
It deeply
it's just
resonates with
truth.
me,
It's
this
just
sense.
truth.
Yeah, and it deeply resonates with me, this sense, and I hear the nuance of like who gets to decide, but it deeply resonates with me, this idea that we choose our path, and that we, yeah, it just resonates with me.
Right. So I'll say this. First of all, I felt it. I experienced it, meaning that this feeling, this knowingness. And then in a conversation with Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, I mentioned this idea, and he said, I believe if I remember the conversation correctly, he said, in a Rabbeinu B'chaya on Parshas Kisisa, he says that a soul before entering the world is given the choices,
Yeah.
it's communicated to the soul all of the suffering and pain and struggles,
Yeah. Hmm.
and they don't come unless they opt in.
There's an idea that the Torah that we learn in the womb is this, is not like we're sitting and learning like the Parsha, that we're actually learning like what will be the journey of your life, like what are the struggles,
Right.
and that we say yes, like we learn our Torah.
And lest one think that the I may be going too far with this, but I can say this, I think, is that I am saying like, oh, I raised my hand for the toughest job. If I'm saying this, and I guess on some level I'm saying that the guy who hurt me also
Mm,
raised his hand for the job.
yeah.
And I think he took the toughest job.
He did his job well.
You know, I remember when we were doing mic
Mm.
drops. So, you know, it's a lot of people sharing their stories and everything else and sharing overcoming trauma and pain and whatever else. And I went to one guy in my office and I said, do you want to join? We're doing a mic drop. Do you want to join? And he's like, oh, I can't. So I'm like, why not? He's like, it's easier for all you guys to share your story. You're sharing about the people who hurt you. What am I going to talk about? The people who I
Mm.
hurt?
Oh.
So,
Yeah, this training that I'm in, um, Thomas Hubel started in this work in doing work with Holocaust survivors and children or grandchildren of SS officers. That was like how he 20 years ago got started in this work. And there are people in my training, there's quite a few children of survivors. Whoa, so much trauma there. And there are Germans who are, their grandparents were SS officers. And there are, Black people whose grandparents were slave owners and slaves. And there's a lot of, white guilt in the room around,
mm,
colonization, all these things. And the energy, yeah, of the perpetrator and the victim. And like that we each hold those identities somewhere inside of us. Like we've all hurt someone.
right,
We've all hurt someone.
right.
And we've all been hurt. And I cannot have compassion or forgiveness if I haven't forgiven or have compassion on those parts of myself.
That have hurt others.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Yeah. It's so easy to separate it into, you know, victim and perpetrator. But I often joke that in the 12 steps, right, we get to step 4 is resentments, right? So we name all the way we've been victimized. Step 8 and 9 deals with amends. So we name all the ways
Always
right, we victimize others. But fortunately, right, there's a reason. Step 4 comes before step 9. Well, first,
First we have to
right,
first we have to get it all out of our
right.
chest.
We were the victims, and at some point, yes, that's
Yeah.
half the story,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, some more than others, but yeah, I think we are probably all the villains in someone else's story.
Yeah, I still feel like there's people in Lamplighters who probably have some beef with me, or just some upset, or have things maybe closed, and that's hard for me to walk with. Yeah.
Right. I think one time I may have met someone who was a little bit upset with me, but it's been a while.
I think you're a relatively powerful person. You're not.
No, there's plenty of, anyway, not going into that. But yeah, it's certainly part of that. It's the harder part of it's the harder part of the work, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely the harder part of the work, to look at the ways that our actions have hurt others.
Hmm. And taking accountability.
What?
And taking accountability.
Yeah, and also forgiving, ourselves
Yeah. Also forgiving.
for that. We've all done some not so cool things.
Yeah. So how are you?
Right. $1 million question. Are you sure you want to know?
Yeah.
All right. There's a whole story. I'll tell you after a cup of ayahuasca.
Yeah, we should sit together sometime.
Amen. We should,
Yeah.
with a beautiful silver Kiddush cup
Yeah.
and a shaman who will teach us orally
Yes.
how this tradition is passed down.
Yes, exactly.
Take it out of the books. Let's
Yeah.
do it in real life.
Yeah.
And a Shabbos maybe together.
Yeah, come to
Who
Armenian.
knows? Maybe.
We have like 60 acres upstate. We're building a whole retreat center.
Okay, let's talk about this. We'll segue into.
So it's really beautiful and interesting, and it's a whole other podcast in and of itself of my marriage and my partnership and all the ways in which it's deepened and is deepening. And how clear it is that Yessi and I, my husband and I, really are here as healing partners together in this journey.
Awesome.
And this innovative spark is not just mine, it's really shared between us. And you know, we've been hosting for years, and we've had so many Shabbos guests, and our home feels a particular way, and we're very aligned in our spiritual practice, and he's also very deep in the work. And thank God we bought a place upstate, 60 acres, and at first it was like, okay, we have a home upstate, you know, we have a vacation home. And then it felt like maybe we can, you know, rent it out. It's big and we can make some money or whatever. But then we're like, nah, we want to build a community. We want to build a space that people can come into and feel spaciousness and feel deep presence and experience movement and medicine and spirituality and ritual and be in nature and sit in circle and share and be witnessed and witness others. And this is what we're doing. You know, we're sort of piggybacking on this beautiful chemistry that we have and the work that we're doing already in our home in Crown Heights, and my teaching and my healing work, and the vision is to have a space. And you know, I mentioned this to somebody who grew up in the Chabad community and who's left for a very long time ago. And he said like how he's not religious, but he's thirsty for a spiritual space where he could be with other people without judgment. And I think that the Jewish community and the Orthodox community in some ways really needs this. So we're very excited. And it feels challenging that it's ours, and it feels really beautiful that it's ours.
Yours, Omex, is that the same thing?
Yeah, so right, Omek is the name of the community and the space. Yeah, Omek.
But I'm saying you're like with Lamplighters, it was yours, but it also wasn't yours. It was something that was the world's as well.
This is exactly this is what, you know, when you were talking about choosing. So what was happening for me inside was like the sense of like, I can see in my life where I am attracting exactly what I need to be working on right now. You know, like we kind of create the perfect storm to invite the perfect lesson. So starting something new in partnership and my own relationship with power, it's like a whole other level of it coming out right now. And it feels like a very rich opportunity for like a deeper level of healing around that wound. Like, what does it mean to have something be born of me and yet it's of us?
Right.
And yet there's this thing that we're creating that's outside of us.
I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out.
I do want to say something on the choosing, because there's a part of it that can sound so helpless. Like my life is kind of set. I chose, and then I chose this struggle, and therefore the struggle I will go through is going to happen. And it almost sounds like it's going to happen anyway. And I know it sounds, there's a predetermined versus free choice. I know that's an age-old debate. I'm not looking to go that far into it, but just what I'm saying about myself, I don't carry that idea of I chose the struggle, and also carry this idea of I don't sit with choice today. And the way I understand it for myself is that what I chose is not, I didn't choose the struggle in exactly the format that it transpired necessarily. I agreed that I would become this lesson, this knowledge.
You chose the learning.
I chose the learning.
Yeah, that's what
I'm going to get this lesson.
I chose this. Yeah, exactly. I chose.
In Search of More podcast has a sponsor officially. OKClarity.com is the place for anyone in the Jewish community, whether you're from, not from, religious, not religious, all that's cool, to find a therapist, psychiatrist, coach, nutritionist, anyone in the wellness space. So this ad is both for those people looking for any of the above. Find the right one. You can go on their website, scroll through their choices. If you don't find someone, they have a concierge service. Reach out to them, describe the issue, and they will help you. I've recommended many people their platform and have only heard good things. If you're a wellness professional, I also recommend joining the directory. They will get you business if you're good at what you do. OK Clarity also has an amazing WhatsApp status. Check them out there. We'll post a link, their website, WhatsApp, in our emails, and wherever you're watching this, in the show notes. Check them out and let them know the In Search of More podcast sent you.
This learning, like an example that I feel resonance around. I've been doing a lot of ancestral work, and my paternal grandmother was like a total mystery for me in many, many ways. And somebody who was betrothed at age 9, had her first child at age 12, actually wanted to abort my father. And her eldest son found like the potion or the vial that she was going to use and like broke it. And so she had no autonomy in that particular way. And autonomy is something that it riles me up, like my autonomy. And when I feel like my autonomy is threatened or something, like it's, and I don't necessarily understand why, but when I tune into her and like feel her, I understand why. And because I feel like the learning of what it feels to really own my power and own my autonomy and have the opportunity to exercise choice is something that my grandmother wished for. And
are you connecting autonomy to not having the ability to abort?
Because she wanted to abort, and that choice was taken away from her.
Okay. So you're connecting those two things.
Yeah,
but because I've wondered, I'm not a woman, but I still have a brain, and I was wondering if I was wondering if that's like that. It feels to me every time I hear that like I'm being programmed.
I'm talking about her.
Right, I know. I'm just wondering if there's another. I'm not.
Oh, if there's an agenda there? No.
Yeah, that's all.
No, there's no agenda. I'm thinking about her experience and feeling into that and feeling like, my father would have been her 9th child, but her 13th pregnancy, and she likely was very, very tired, and maybe felt like the compassionate thing for herself would be to abort. I'm not talking how lucky, right. but that choice was taken from her.
Okay, no, because you easily could have in the story, right? If one was just hearing the story, not in 2023, they would probably think the fact that she was married at 9 showed less autonomy than the fact.
That's also part of it.
Right, meaning you can still totally embrace the fact that you want to hold on to this
Like, where
autonomy
do
in
you
the name
want
of
to
your grandmother.
start?
Right,
It's
exactly.
like, yeah,
Right. I just felt okay. I shouldn't.
yeah,
Whatever. I should let you tell your story anyway. But to finish the point, I just feel like that framing of the issue
yeah.
as women's choice is. I just around abortion. I just feel like I'm being programmed when I hear it because I don't feel like. I feel like someone can totally think women have choice and not be against this for reasons other than women's choice. I just reject the framing in much the same way that I reject the framing on the other side of pro-life, right? As I reject both framings. Like, let's not frame the question that there's no pro-life and anti-life, and there's no pro-choice and anti-choice. Maybe they exist, but that's not the framing of it. Both of trying to program me with their definition. Like, let's frame it along
They're
these
all trying to
lines.
program us
Exactly.
all the time.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
Exactly.
I'm trying to deprogram, tell you I'm deprogramming you, but write a new program.
There you go. My point was
back to the program.
Back to the program. Yeah, 1 second. Following this thread of choosing the learning, and like that it happens through the generations, and that sometimes we're choosing the learning of our ancestors, and
meaning choosing
there's
to
power
learn.
in that.
Is it choosing to learn the same lesson, or choosing to learn what she didn't learn?
It's the opportunity to heal, work with, be with something that she didn't have that opportunity for.
Right.
Even the fact that I have a life in which I can rumble with how I exercise power and autonomy.
Right, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that I even get to say I don't have autonomy.
Right.
Right. That's huge.
Without sounding like hokey, one of my earlier meditations that she kind of came to me in was she saying to me, like, I've been waiting for you.
Neat.
That's pretty hokey.
Yeah, that's neat. That's not hokey. Yeah, once you go one step outside of anything, exactly. We're already in.
Yeah, I mean, I've been, yeah. Exactly.
There's a little tiny circle, and then like once you believe Wi-Fi exists, then you're already outside of it, and you can go to ancestors talking.
Yeah.
Right. So that thought, right? So you're saying that there was a sense that you took on. You said, "I'm going to take this learning. I'm going to."
Yeah,
take it on.
there's a sense of like, of some part of me actively choosing.
Right.
To learn and integrate and work through things.
Right. And this is where I think the freedom of choice comes in, is that like I opted into this lesson at the beginning of class, right? I mean,
right.
Before I came in. And I gave the teacher permission to do whatever is necessary until I became the lesson.
Until I
became the lesson.
Yeah.
And then I can choose at any moment to learn it, or the teacher still has full permission to keep me in class.
You reminded me of something that came to me also one time in the medicine space. I'm in love with the process of becoming who I already am. Like we are unfolding who we already are. Like the lessons that we actually know deeply already inside. And yeah, there's a part of us that's chosen to like live the life that affirms that deep knowing.
Live the life that right. And then once we do that, then we kind of are that.
Yeah.
Someone sees us and look.
Yeah.
Right.
We embody that.
But I will become that.
Yeah, that's the being, not the doing.
Okay. So we've done a lot of doing. And I guess we'll let this be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming out.
Beautiful. Thank you.